Okay, so I'm actually recording this to show a couple of the team members how I'm using Gravity Sketch to do some set deck and some various different things within Gravity Sketch. But I thought I'd do a version that I could actually show to the outside world, just because it seems like this might be something that other people could use somehow. So here we have the Cherry Blossom course. This was mostly done inside of Gravity Sketch. We are using an asset library. We've built all the holes by hand. This is one of the Cinti libraries that we're using. We actually kind of combine several of these. We're starting to build a lot more of our own models for the newer courses. But anyway, so as you can see, this is all just sort of like live within Gravity Sketch. You can just pick stuff up and move it around. This is what it looks like before, sort of like a big optimization pass to get everything in. However, we're doing all of this building inside of a DCC like Maya or Blender after Gravity Sketch, because that allows us to combine things and do some optimization stuff that you can't get by just dumping prefabs into Unity. Because I know that there is like some VR stuff you could do within Unity, but this is just a much cleaner way of kind of getting everything that you need to set up. And then you can always polish it off in a modeling package before, or a DCC like Maya or Blender before you go into Unity. So anyway, so I'm just going to show you how I set this up. Because it's not, it's actually gotten a lot better within the last couple versions. I'm actually on the newest version, so I haven't even got a chance to fully explore some of the new features, so there might be some of the ways that I'm doing things might be a little outdated. Okay, so why don't I just do a new sketch here. Okay. First things first, I have already exported. So if I go to my menu here, by the way, it's the blue right up there, and then the prefabs, and then I'm going to go to import models. So this is something that I just found that was already new. I made a special folder here. So by the way, I am using this is the Oculus Quest, but it's running through Link. I found that the PC version is just way more powerful of Gravity Sketch because you've got so many different live elements and the rendering is a lot nicer, so I always do it through the Link on the PC. So if you go into, I think by default, the folder would be your Documents folder and then Gravity Sketch. Anything that you want to import has to go in a very specific folder. So if you're trying to import an OBJ like this, you need to go, I believe it's called Import Library. So I'll just do this, it'll take a second to load up. And one of the new things that I saw that they have done, which is really critical and makes so many things better for just how I am doing this stuff, is now, it used to be that you would just grab this and pull it out and place it wherever you want. Now, you can click on it and it will actually let you make sure that you set the scale and even rotate and do some different things like that. This is huge. So if you want to change the scale, you can do it right there to go centimeters, meters, inches, different things like that. But when you're done, hit import model and that will bring the model in. So I'm gonna zoom out here. One note, as of right now, at least as far as I know, OBJs are the only things that you can import. You can't import FBXs. I have found sometimes the OBJ import, sometimes it can get a little wonky. The one thing that I have found that seems to work pretty consistently is I turn off the materials in the OBJ when I'm exporting it from Blender. And that seems to work every time. Again, that could have been something that was in an old version that fixed it since then. Okay, so now we've got our asset library and this is all grouped together, which you can see by the pink. One thing that I want to show you, actually no, I'll show that in just a little bit here. So first, let's add a little bit of color to this. So the way I'm going to do that, this is a little funky, but this works really well. Because this is an asset library, it's all using the texture atlas, and so every single object uses a single material. So if I go to reference images, and now this is showing the reference images folder within that same Gravity Sketch folder. I'm going to bring in that as a reference image. Now that's actually the texture atlas for all of these. Oh, by the way, one thing I do wish is that there was a way to actually see the names of some of these images, because it's not always, you know, sometimes you have some that are pretty similar. I didn't see a way that you could actually turn that option on. Anyways, so now that we have that in the scene, if I grab, and this is with the right grip, if I grab the object and then hit the A button for color, hold that down, and now you will actually see that the material that we just put on there is available. So now everything has the texture. I'm going to do that same thing again, but this time I'm going to go up to the materials and switch it to the basic material, which gives it some shading. Once you've done that, you can hold the right grip and press the minus button, which is the B button on your right controller. And now we've got everything with, with the colors and stuff. So, like I said, this all came in as one big group. I will hit the purple button, which is the X button, while I've got it selected, and that will just break that apart so that now I've got all these individually. A couple of settings that I have found when you're doing these big environment stuff that are pretty critical to set up right. So if I go to my settings, I've always used the vertical look because you want to make sure that there's a ground plane and you don't want stuff, you know, if you were doing like a sculpt, it might make more sense, like a head sculpt or something, it might make more sense to turn that off. But I always want to leave that on. I've also found it's really critical in the workspace. I think that I'm using is it just the gray room? No, I'm using the studio. And the reason for that is that if I get really, I'm just going to go really big just to show you, is that if you use sometimes one of the other ones, like the warehouse is really cool, but things go through the floor and through the walls when you're up really big. So that can become a real problem when you're trying to do some environmental stuff. So I actually have a custom one that I really like, but for now I'll just use this studio one right over there. A couple of other and the preferences things that I've found. The copying, because a lot of times what I'm doing is like, so say that I've got, back here, why don't I just make something. I'm gonna grab this guy right here. And so I'm holding with my right grip, and then I'm going to press the the right trigger, and that will just stamp it. So you see how it's still sort of, it shows the ghost now, but you can basically keep stamping that as many times as you want. That's really useful when you're trying to add like a lot of these little, a lot of these little bits of grass and stuff around. You can just really quickly stamp it in. I'm doing this a little bit more messily than I usually do. But anyways, that is sort of like 80% of the building of a more organic level like this. So a couple of other really useful tools. Oh yeah, so to make that work, you want to turn on Ghost Move, which is what will make sure, like when I grab that, it still shows where the old one was. You might want to turn that off if you're just moving things around, but if you're doing a lot of stamping and copying, it might be nice to have that on. I think that's actually maybe one of the newer tools. And you also want to turn on this return after copy, because again, the way that you do stuff, right grip and then right trigger to stamp. And so a lot of times the way that I do this is I kind of do it in different passes. So let's say that we have let's say that we've kind of got our scene set up here, and I want to maybe add like a rocks pass, or maybe just like a general pass. What I'd probably do is I'd go over and I would sort of build myself a little, like almost like an artist's palette. So let's make those. Now note that I am copying those by stamping them. I am not just moving them over, because I want to maintain sort of like the main reference to that. So let's say that that's my palette. Let's throw a couple other rocks in there. There. Then what I'll sometimes do is I'll just group those together, and then this kind of becomes my palette. So that as I'm moving around, I can kind of have that palette, and I might even make another copy of that and then break it apart. And now I can very quickly, as I'm right over here, I could just go in and I can kind of do all the stamping stuff that I want. Maybe I'll do a few of these rocks. Obviously you would try to do a bit better job than this, but it is, for certain things like rocks and plants, it is very impressive how quickly you can do some of this stuff, whereas it would be a bit of a nightmare to do this in like in Maya or Blender or something. So then, once I've kind of got that, I might delete my thing, and then I'll go back to my palette, and let's say that we're over on a different part of the level. It's over here. I've just got that. I can move my whole palette over, duplicate it one more time, break it apart, and keep stamping. So again, this is just the workflow that I've come up with. You can, I'm sure you'll find different ways of doing it for however you like to do it, but that seems to work pretty well for me. Okay, a couple of other little tools and tricks. So let me actually load up the previous scene that I was in. So I'm going to go to save, exit to lobby, I don't need to save that. There's this one. Okay, there we go. So now that we're sort of back in this scene here, one of the really critical things that is super, super helpful if you could set it up correctly, if you set up the scale correctly when you import stuff, and again, that's why I do the checkbox import as opposed to just dragging it into the scene, is it'll make sure that things are vertically aligned, and it'll keep the scale exactly right. So there is a new tool. It's actually part of the beta. So if you go to settings and then the star beta, flip on tool belt. And what that, this is off by default, but if you flip that on, now what you could do is you can use the right grip and you basically swipe and it will access these couple of other tools. And I've played around with a couple of them, there's some cool things, but the one that I use a lot is this banana tool. I don't know why it's a banana, but it is a teleporter, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense when you're out, or when you're out wide like this, but there's another feature. If you go into the settings, and then just the first one, the sketching aid, if you hit home orientation, that will set your scale and your location to basically the 0, of the scene, but the scale is also correct. So, looks like this one's got some funky shadows going on. Maybe that's just the shadow of I'm gonna switch this around to my other workspace. Yeah, I think the shadows were just sort of like going onto a floor that didn't really exist. So now that I have this banana, I can just grab that and push the trigger to warp around the scene. And I know that if you're not in VR, since you're just watching the video of this, you won't really appreciate how useful this is. But this is a way to quickly get around your model and see it at scale. So minus the lighting that we see in Unity, this is exactly what you see when you're playing the Unity version of the game. The scale is exact. So if you set it up correctly, this banana tool is so, so useful when you are sketching levels, especially because VR is so sensitive to scale stuff. And if you get a set of steps that are actually accidentally scaled the wrong way, it can really, it's really, really apparent when things aren't scaled correctly in VR. So that was the main one. There was one other one that I'm trying to remember now. Another little trick that I wanted to show you. Okay, here we go. So this is our Transylvania scene. And what we did in this one, because this was architectural, we did all of the castle in a combination of Blender and Maya and just a bunch of different things like that. The dungeon was all done in that way. One of the things that I have had a bit of a hard time with is in Gravity Sketch, if you want to quickly grab stuff, to me what is so cool about this is being able to really quickly do these organic placements of stuff, as well as just sort of like doing rough layouts and all that in a very organic way. Where I start to, it feels like it slows down a little bit more is when you're trying to do architectural stuff that needs to snap together more precisely or that needs to stay perfectly up and down. I think that they've got some new tools that are actually in that tool belt. I haven't actually figured out how to use them, but it's a brand new thing. But still, in general, I found that when you're doing stuff like these big castles, that sort of thing can often be faster to do in Blender. But what we'll often do is we will do a big, we'll kind of get the layout of it like that, and then we'll do all of the set decorations. So that's what I've done up here, where all of these extra little things, like these little vines and stuff growing around, oops, all these little, like that's all sort of like set deck stuff that was added after the fact. And so one other thing that can be very, very useful, when you export, it will, especially if you export as FBX, it will remember the layers. So if you go into the layers here, it's a really good idea to kind of keep those, like, in this case, I basically made I've got the library here. Let me just turn the visibility off on that. So the library was actually the asset library. I don't even know if I still have it in this scene. I might have deleted it. Looks like I did. But yeah, so here you can basically see all the stuff that was added in Gravity Sketch as the set deck. The castle was basically everything else. So you could see how quickly I was able to sort of like get in there and add all these little cobblestones and stuff like that. just very quickly grabbing stuff, throwing it around. It's also helpful because then you can lock the stuff that you don't want to, and when you export, you'll get these individually, so that say that you just want to add stuff on top of your previous model. That way you've got it as a separate thing where you can separate it out later. One other little thing that often happens when you've got, because of more of the OBJ import process for doing all this, you will often lose your centers, and just the pivots and everything will often kind of get lost. So it's a good idea you don't necessarily want to just be hopping back all the time between Gravity Sketch and Blender. You want to get your main model done. Maybe I usually do a reference in Gravity Sketch just using very primitive gray shapes. Then go in, get the really key important things kind of locked in, and then come back and do a final set deck pass, or sorry, set deck stands for set decoration. That's all these little things. Oh, maybe it doesn't like being up. There we go, must have been locked. Doing all of this because, again, like this maybe took like an hour to add in all these little tiny things, and that would be a nightmare to try to do, especially some of the ones that are a little bit more closely wrapping around, like, you know, some of these little vines and stuff that need to like very closely sort of like feel like they're wrapping around the gravestones, things like that are just so fast when you've got it on a controller to do. So use those layers, lock stuff, keep it careful. Then when you export it back in, you'll have lost most of your centers, but then you can just apply the new Gravity Sketch, the additional stuff that you've added on top of your existing thing. I've also, a lot of times what I'll also do, if I have final models of the greens, here you can see some of the textures are messed up, but a lot of the times what I'll do is I might, in the design phase, I might just sort of loosely place these where I want them to be, but notice that because these are greens, that is no longer perfectly vertical, so I would go back in and I would recopy those over and just sort of loosely line them up to my reference, but I would actually replace that geo with the original one to preserve some of those pivot points and make sure that everything is perfectly flat, because it has to be for mini golf. Anyways, I think that is the gist of it. I might do another one of these videos as we get into some more stuff and find out some new tricks, and maybe once I get a chance to play around with some of the new features. So feel free to ask questions. Hopefully this helps everybody out. Take care.